Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the weekly discussions podcast where we pick a specific subject regarding Vectorio and let the community give their feedback and thoughts on it. This is a pre-recorded message that I'm just adding at the front of the video just to kind of touch on what happened in this podcast, which is I had picked a certain subject and then it kind of went off course and people started talking about some other topics. And so it was clear to me that the priority of things needed to change a little bit. And so what we talked about today, the topic that we talked about today, is actually been lowered in priority in place of another feature that you'll hear about as a common theme throughout this podcast. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of preface that video with that disclaimer that this podcast does kind of go quite a bit off topic from what we originally started talking about. But I think that's kind of the beauty of letting people kind of just talk and give their opinions and stuff, is you kind of figure out, what people want the most, and what if there's certain features that maybe I thought were important that aren't as important as others. So yeah, I thought this was a really cool episode. We had a lot of people come on and talk, and yeah, it's a pretty good one. So I'll let you guys listen, and yeah, hopefully you enjoy. And then, we'll just, people will take turns and stuff. So I think, Thrift, put your hand up first. So I'm going to invite you on stage. Hello.
Hello. Yeah, so I thought things like, for example, the safeguard beacon, they just give like a 1.5 times multiplier to hit points, for example.
Right.
But what if you had it like where it's like tiered upgrades? So in each safeguard beacon, you can deposit a certain resource, for example, gold.
Right.
And after you've deposited 100 gold, the safeguard beacon, instead of giving like a 10% boost, gives a 20% boost, or like a 15% boost. After depositing another 200 gold, it gives a 20% boost.
Okay.
And that scales like exponentially, for example.
Right. So you're saying like the amount of resources you put into a beacon would dictate how useful it actually is to the surrounding buildings, essentially. I gotcha.
Yeah, exactly. And you could also implement that, for example, with resource boosters.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, so the beacons are actually going to get changed in, I think, V014, and I'm basically going to do away with like the bigger radius of the safeguard beacon. So right now what happens is you place a safeguard beacon and it deploys a huge radius around your buildings that then puts down like this custom tile on them. For example, I'm sure you guys have seen those the safeguard tiles. So what's going to happen in V014 is the safeguard beacons will actually have or any beacon really will have a smaller radius around it, but it will be more effective. And then the tiles will actually become their own decoration type thing. So you can actually place tiles anywhere you want around your base. But yeah, the beacons I think would be a very interesting thing to look at for creating some more resource sinks in the local area. But then it has to turn into the balancing thing of like, do you have global modifiers, and how would you balance that with the local beacons?
Yeah. The thing is, the way you could implement them is by just like giving pretty small buffs.
Right.
Which is like it's very incremental. So early on in the game, you're not gonna have that many resources, so you're just gonna be able to get like a 25% boost. But during end game, you could be able to get like a 50-75% boost.
Right. Okay. So yeah. So it's like I see what you're saying. But then so it's you're talking about like the local beacons though, right? You're not talking about the global modifiers. So then I guess this kind of opens up the other discussion. Can both of those work in parallel, or should it only be local modifiers and do away with the global ones? So you actually need to have the building next to the other buildings that you want to modify the stats for.
I mean, you can also have global modifiers, because like as long as you don't have like too strong of buffs, I don't think it would affect it too much.
Yeah. I just the thing that I see being a problem is if you have a local modifier that's like health, for example, that does plus whatever X amount of percentage bonus to the building, say it's like 50%, and then you have a global modifier that uses like maybe like plus 20% health, then why would you not just use the global modifier? Because that seems a lot simpler than having to go set up a beacon around every little place that you want to have.
Yeah, but what if these buffs are
boosted stat.
multiplicative to each other?
Yeah, so you're saying like they would stack kind of thing?
Yeah. So it would be like if you have a 100% boost and a 50% boost, instead of it being 150%, it would be like 200% boost.
Right. Yeah.
In total.
Yeah, I think it would come down to. So I'm just trying to think of like from a casual player's perspective, if I have a utility that lets me boost all the buildings without actually needing to, put down on a beacon next to them, like I'm just going to do that instead of using the beacon. So
yeah,
I think it's in a case where unless one is doing something very unique to the buildings, it needs to be one or the other basically. I think it either needs to be a stronger local boost that you need to set up, and you need to have a cargo drone route, create a cargo drone route to that building. So it goes and picks up whatever resource it needs to boost, then it goes into the beacon, or it needs to be global, where it's less effective, but it just consumes a constant rate of resources, and then you only need one.
The thing about having it basically in tiers or of like tiered upgrades is you'd only have to deposit the resources once.
Right.
So
so you're saying okay, so yeah, so this doesn't
kind of level beacons.
Yeah, okay, so this doesn't actually fix the problem of your storage just having too many resources in them. So
I mean,
it creates. Sorry, you go ahead.
So the way it would be, or like the way I thought about it, is that it would level infinitely. So the first upgrade costs like 200, the next 400, the one after that 800 and stuff like that, and just like scales exponentially. And you could always deposit more to get a slightly bigger boost.
So it's endless, kind of.
Yep, but the boost is very small per level, and obviously scales very badly. But
yeah.
I
that kind of is, again, I get like, I think it from the perspective of you're constantly expanding or changing your base, right? So would you want to pump, like tons of resources into one beacon that might just get destroyed in the end? And maybe that extends the discussion of should there be ways to move buildings around your base without destroying them? Like that opens up another discussion there, I think, that we can chat about. But I bounce back and forward between like the local beacons and the global beacons, because I think right now, at least with how the cargo drone system is, where it's a little tedious to set up drones, it would be better to have one central area that you're boosting stats in, and then and not so much look at the local ones, or have very weak local ones and make the global ones more attractive, kind of thing. So that is definitely one idea. I am going to let somebody else up on stage, so I'm just going to move you back. Thank you for your idea. I don't know who this is. I think it's Awesome Games. Inviting you up to speak. Hello.
Hello. I have some interesting ideas to add. Like, I like the idea of reclaimers costing resources, but not all reclaimers. Like, reclaimers should cost heat, but certain ones should cost power, other ones should cost resources. And there could be a lot of detail in, like, this one has more range but costs resources. Power is easier to provide, but resources will be more efficient. There's a lot of thing you can put into that.
Right, so opening up some different options for like different types of reclaimers that will all have their own like buying costs, essentially.
Yes. And another thing about if you're trying to add resource sinks and such, what you really need is better drone systems, because people are not really going to like the fact of having to sit cargo drones to every last little thing, especially with resource-using reclaimers that will be spaced over a large area.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah. I have two changes to drones. One that's not really very related, but should probably happen, and the other one that is a new type of drone that is really going to make this a lot better.
Sure.
The first is transport drones are right now just a slightly different cargo drone. They're not really that much unique enough.
Right.
But what would make them more unique is instead of having them just be faster and have less storage, make them have less storage, be faster, but also when going between the input and output zone, make them take a consistent amount of time. Not a consistent speed, but a consistent time. That would make them better at long ranges and worse at short ranges, really adding into the detail of what drones do you use.
Okay,
and
that's
you could
interesting.
You could also apply that to them traveling between their zones and their port, making them more encouraged for the drone boosters.
Right. Okay, I see what you're saying. So that way you have basically a way to make sure that you're transporting X amount of resources from one location to another at a constant rate. That's actually a really good idea, because that would make later portions of the game where you need to actually consider, like generators will require X amount of resources. That would at least let you calculate some way that you can ensure that there's the steady rate of resources that you need heading to that location or whatever. So that is actually a fantastic idea.
Yeah, also it would just help encourage using cargo drones for short range and transporter drones for long range.
Yeah, I actually quite like that idea a lot. And that would work perfectly with having more buildings that consume resources. But I also think that something that needs to happen at the same time is, if we're going to make drones more required, I guess is the right word, make them, you need to use them for certain tasks, like supplying your reclaimers as an example. There needs to be better tools in place so that you don't have to go through and set the route every time. So I think this would start off by including like global zones. I think is the first thing that we need to look at. So like having a global pickup zone and a global drop-off zone. So what you can do is, when you middle mouse click a cargo port, for example, there should be options where it can automatically draw from a global zone and automatically output to either a relative local tile. So like, for example, if I copy a drone that's at 0, 0 and it has an output at 0, 1, if I paste it at 5, 0, its output should be 5, 1. So the output should follow the drone port, and then it should have the ability to then, take from a certain place. And then that way you can set it up where when you pipette a cargo drone, it will just always be set up to then take from the correct place and output to the place that you want it to. But that is, it's going to take a little bit more time on my part, and not something I think I can squeeze in for V014.
I had a different idea that solves a very similar purpose. The
Right.
supply drone. It's a drone that has the same input mechanism as like a cargo or transporter drone, but the output area has no maximum size, and you also have to select a type of building that'll be the only type of building it outputs to. So if you wanted to output like crystallite to your reclaimers, you would need to give it a crystallite input zone, put the output zone over the area you want it to supply to, which would be like an entire outpost, and then you just set it to power these reclaimers. And so that would supply the area with a single drone, which would work in the current copy-paste system.
Right, so you're saying, having like a filter, kind of like a drone, I think that's what you're saying? You're saying like a filter where it would only output to a specific type of building, right?
Sort of, but it also has to have that kind of filter on. So you can't just go and put this material for everything that needs it in this area. You have to go, no, give it to this type of thing. That would sort of like help encourage using other types of drones for other types of things.
Right, and then, so then I don't know if that solves the issue of drones feeling tedious to set up. What I was, as kind of a counter idea to this, with having a supply drone, is I think a drone that automatically runs a route from like the nearest building that requires resources to whatever a pickup zone is. And this is kind of a band-aid fix to the issue of drones being annoying to set up. But just having some sort of drone that would automatically run the resources from run resources to the nearest building that requires that a certain resource, and then picking it up automatically from the nearest storage array that has that resource. But again, I see it as a band-aid fix and not so much a fix to the underlying issue, because you should be able to use any drone and set it up in a way that you can easily copy-paste what it's doing to other parts of your base. But yeah. All right, I am going to, there's a lot of people requesting to speak, so thank you for giving your ideas. Very appreciated. I am going to invite up, I think, who was requesting? Oh my god, there's so many hands up. I think it was Delta was the last one, so I'm sending you an invite to the stage. Hello.
All right. I think my mic might be better because I'm on PC now.
Okay, sweet.
I might be coherent now. So let me just start. Now, back when I said that setting up resource drones and cargoes with I was like, before I knew you could just pipette them.
Right.
Like, now that I know you can just pipette them, it's so much easier. So I kind of take that back. But I do think we should probably set up some stuff regarding resource sinks in general, because late game is a billion resources, you can't do shit with it because you already done everything and it wasn't so cheap at that point.
Yeah.
But what I would propose, I mean, I think having to set up all the beacons one by one would be like having to spend resources for every one of them would also get pretty darn expensive quite fast. So I propose just being able to, let's say, use the hub to set up the bus for said beacons, but you only have to connect the beacons in one way to the hub or something. But you could like spend resources to the hub to increase the effects of beacons globally, which are connected back to the hub, in some way.
Okay, so you're suggesting basically a way or a system where you need to daisy chain beacons back to the hub. What you're saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so that I think that idea actually works much better for the reclaimers than it does for like beacons that would boost stuff. Because if the reclaimers actually were if you were enforced to connect reclaimers to your hub, that would then kind of solve that issue for everything simultaneously, and it would also make reclaimers a bit more like have more of a purpose, I guess, like something for you that you have to defend, right? Because right now, again, this is we talked about this last week on the podcast, but you could basically just create a line of reclaimers out to a location that you want to capture, and then just immediately delete that line of reclaimers. So that whole process is so pointless. So in my mind, I think that is a feature that would work really well with reclaimers, but that would be a very big fundamental change to how the game works. And I think if that were to happen, I would also at the same time need to introduce some sort of other, what would you call it? Some other reclaimer that can function as an outpost, like the outpost core, for example. The outpost cores that you fight. Exactly. Giving you your own outpost cores where they can function as a way to keep your reclaimers alive and not have to connect back to the hub. And then that would be a great opportunity for a resource sink, for example.
Even if like outpost cores would definitely be interesting to set up and stuff, but with reclaimers, I think daisy training would definitely be a nice thing to add. I mean, it could be interesting to play around, but I think like having like the current reclaimers will be a little bit hard to set up like a massive giant tunnels all the way up to different outposts. So I would maybe propose to like add a reclaimer which could just select 100 tiles, and you can like customize which tiles it collects. So it'd be like a straight line as the reclaimer with a small box around the reclaimer so you can defend it, so you don't have to make lots of small outposts or a giant tunnel.
Sorry, can you repeat that last part again? It was just a bit hard to hear you. You're saying?
So
just
kind of like so like reclaimers that could like claim a custom area instead of like a square,
Oh, okay, so are you building on the outpost core idea then, with like having a way to?
But also like regarding outpost cores, you could maybe make it so that you could maybe for global bus you could use like I feel like using the hub for global bus would be a pretty nice idea.
Yeah.
But you have to maybe like what I think is to like set it up so that you kind of like global bus, but to use them you have to set something up, so like you don't have to
I see what you're
upgrade
saying.
everything one by one, but you only have to connect something
right
to the hub,
to the hub
or the nearest outpost core.
Yeah, and so I think that's in my mind how the reclaimers would work. You wouldn't need to upgrade anything. You wouldn't, because it would be very tiresome having to upgrade each building individually. I think having a way where it just automatically connects back to the hub would work much better. And then having the opportunity to construct outpost cores, but they would cost like a lot to set up, because again, there needs to be some sort of strategic choice you have to make where it's like, well, I can either defend this line of reclaimers connecting back to my hub, or I can spend a ton of resources to set up an outpost that doesn't need to be connected to the hub. So I think that would create some unique gameplay opportunities there, and is definitely something I think we could consider. It seems like we keep coming back to reclaimers a lot of times with other features, and so I think maybe next week that's what we'll talk about, just because I think they definitely need some work. But
also something I'm quite against like the idea of every tile claim, because there would be a lot of ways to just completely cheese the game if you really rush early game off. You could maybe just build a giant wall and nothing will ever get through,
Yeah. So
that's just
Yeah, I think reclaimers definitely need a change, and I also think walls need a change as well. So those two, I think, are going to be the subject of future future topics. But yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for giving your ideas. I am going to just cycle you out just because there's a lot of people putting their hands up, and we only have so much time here. Let's see. Okay, there's where was the last person? I think it was Lance who was next. All right, Lance, I just sent you an invite. Hello.
So with my ideas for this game, I mean, so in my opinion, I think repeaters should be buffed because when you unlock shotguns, repeaters are essentially redundant in my opinion, from what I've seen. Like they don't need like a big buff, but like just a slight damage buff would be very nice.
Yeah, so they actually have already received a buff on my end in the development build right now with the power rework.
Oh.
So their damage actually has not been touched because I think that their damage for the amount of power that they'll cost in the power rework is actually quite fair. But what has been buffed is the range of the repeater. So now they can engage with an enemy a lot sooner than they would have before. And that should make them more of an attractive choice over the shotgunner that has a very limited range to it. So my hope is it'll kind of create a balance there where the repeaters might be more reliable early game, but the shotgunners will do a much better job at taking out the stronger units that start showing up at like heat level 4 and 5 or whatever the hell. I can't remember what heat levels they start showing up at. And then the Ranger, then like again, it builds onto that. So then the Ranger would be an even longer range version of the repeater that does very high damage but a very slow rate of fire. And then once I know there's issues with the targeting system right now, but there'll be ways to basically set up defenses where they bounce off each other. So you'll have like the Ranger set up to target the strongest enemies that come up, and then you'll have the shotgunner target the smaller enemy. Yeah. So they'll bounce off each other where, a shotgunner and a Ranger together will be very effective as compared to other, turrets and stuff. And my hope is it'll create a strategic choice there.
What update will this come in, sorry?
This is the next update, V014. So this is already in place on my end. And yeah, it's pretty much already good to go. So
when are you planning to release it?
Once other changes are implemented. Specifically, I'm trying to fix the issue with resource, like having way too many resources in your base. Because what happens right now in the current game is you're constantly kind of changing your base and stuff. So you're removing walls, you're replacing them, you're removing turrets, you're replacing them. And that kind of acts as an okay-ish resource sink because you're constantly doing stuff. But in the power rework, while you're still doing stuff, you actually have less of what you need to build on the defensive side because defenses have all been given massive buffs and basically kind of been reworked so that they're individually a lot stronger because of the reduced power pool now. And so the idea is to create strategic defensive setups where it's no longer like I'm just going to place a line of miniguns and that will hold me off for the rest of the game. It's more of like okay, I need to actually think this through. How can I min-max my defense so that I'm consuming as little power as possible, but I'm not having to use a ton of resources to supply the power for those defenses. Just kind of is the goal of that system. So yeah, so it's kind of a fundamental change in that area. But because of that change, you're building defenses less, and that means you're spending less resources, and that really, really paints the picture of just how bad the current resource sinks are in the game. Like it really feels like you're just sitting on top of resources 24/7, and it makes gathering new resources not feel totally necessary.
So, yeah, I understand.
Yeah,
and also sorry, could I?
No, yeah, you go ahead.
Oh yeah, all right, thank you. So as I was saying, with to expand on Delta's like idea about like walls and like reclaimers and stuff being really overpowered, I mean, I'd agree with them. If you like watch my screen share real quick just to see my base, you can it sort of demonstrates what Delta's on about how ridiculously overpowered just walling and that is.
Yeah,
because
the walls are a separate issue. Like separate from the resource sinks issue. There's two separate issues there. The walls need a huge rebalance, and I think they should maybe consume power as an example. Like I think you said that earlier in the chat, or they need to have some other balancing done to them.
Because like you can just see that I can just box everything. All my resources are in the middle, so I'm on top of resources 24/7.
Yeah. Exactly, and that's obviously a huge problem. So I think there needs to be resource sinks in the game that make gathering resources more attractive and more useful to your base's overall defense. So yeah. All right. Sorry, you go ahead.
I have one final suggestion.
Sure.
It will be a quick one. So randomly, the Atlas just decides to die. Like, I haven't done the Atlas, but I can't find it anywhere on the map. Is that like an intended, like, small lucky chance?
No, it's a bug. It's when it hits. I think it hits a decryptor and then it dies, or something's going on where it hits something it's not supposed to, and then it just dies. The Atlas actually needs like a slight rework because it's quite a few unintended features are happening with it and bugs where like its AI is being all finicky and stuff. So it just needs a kind of, I guess, polishing pass is what it needs. Yeah, like some updates.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna move you back to the audience. Thank you very much for your ideas. Let's see. I don't know who this is because I have streamer mode on. I think it's Vetrez, but I just sent you an invite. Hello.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good.
Very good. What are your thoughts on resource sinks?
So I thought about having different types of power generators where power will be a resource.
Like different generators that would consume resources?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's one of the focuses of the power rework is power generators will consume resources, and that will kind of create that strategic choice for the player where it's like, how many resources do you want to put into power to then defend your base? Because again, in the power rework, defenses consume power, but they don't produce heat, and logistics don't consume power, but they produce heat. So you have to kind of create this balance between your logistics and your defense and try to maximize your defense without spending too many resources. But the problem with that is the generators only take a specific resource, and there's a lot of resources in the game right now.
Yeah, I thought about some types of generators, like burner, for example. It will take almost anything, and it will generate more power on based how rare the resource is.
Oh, okay. So like a thing where you just put any resource into it, and then it produces a certain amount of power based on that resource?
Yeah.
Yeah, that could work. That's a good idea. What I have right now for the early game is the mini reactors now are required to be placed on an essence node, which basically makes a decision. And again, I was trying to tie this into the boosters and stuff, where the boosters would also take a similar resource, where like you'll have to kind of choose, well, how many generators do I want taking essence, and how much do I actually want to be collecting and putting towards, whatever you're using them for. But I also think that idea could work quite well and would kind of let the player choose what resources they actually want to burn for different power. And then that would actually make crafting more attractive, where it's like maybe you want it to craft gilded crystal and then burn that instead of just burning the gold and the crystallite. So I think that's definitely a really good idea. I think that could work really well. And there's a lot going on in the chat here. I don't know who this is, but this may be a bad idea, but I feel like there should be a special type of enemy that does increase damage to walls. Okay. Yeah, the walls seem to be a reoccurring subject. The walls and the reclaimer seem to be a recurring subject in both of these podcasts. So I think those are definitely in need of a rework. But I do just want to focus on the resource sinks for this one, because I've noticed that is a glaring problem right now with the power rework. But I still see there's some people with their hands up. So thank you, Vetrez, for giving your idea with the generators. That's actually a really good idea. I think, who is this? IHNN, I think. Hello.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. Yeah, so my ideas were one was setting up multiple drones at the same time, so you can just select all of them in a box and then select inputs and outputs. And another one was that you can maybe have this for all drones, that you can have put a reason from anywhere to an output. but prioritizing close ones and being able to blacklist certain places so it won't take from there if you need it for anything.
Right. So this is an issue with drones, then, right? This is like making drones. Creating better ways to make them work. Yeah. I think that would be something to look at if we were to create more localized buildings that would require resources. Like if we're going to make resources what'd you call it? There's going to be like a common theme of buildings requiring resources, and the only way to give them resources is through drones, then yeah, there needs to be much better ways to set up drones that are not as annoying. And so maybe, based on what people are saying, maybe this is something that should come first instead of the creating more resource sinks. I think it's an issue where there needs to be, if they're going to be resource sinks in the game, they need to be put in a way where they will not be extremely reliant on creating very integral like drone networks and stuff until there's better tools in place for setting up those drone networks. But yeah, did you have any ideas regarding the resource sinks, or were you just kind of more looking at like the drones to kind of as a start for that?
No, I was just thinking of drones. And
Okay.
also, I don't know if I completely understood one guy's point. Maybe I'm just saying the same thing, but I was thinking that the global buffs can maybe like be connected to the main base via reclaimers, so that if you want like a place to collect resources, you can do it faster by having that line of reclaimers and actually defending it instead of just building that line and cutting it off immediately.
Okay, so I understand what you're saying. So you're saying instead of having either or, so either you don't need to have reclaimers connected to your your hub, or you need to have reclaimers connected to your hub. You're saying kind of an in-between where keeping reclaimers connected to your hub is more attractive because it will improve the performance of drones out in that outpost, for an example.
Yes,
kind of what you're
exactly.
saying. Yeah, that would be a good kind of mediary kind of solution in between both of those without completely taking away the outpost, and that still makes the outpost core idea, I think, also that works well in that solution, because then you would want to use an outpost core to then maybe disconnect a line of reclaimers and then still have that efficiency boost or whatever. So those are two, I think, really good examples. I still see some more people raising their hand here. I'm going to move you back to the audience. Thank you for your suggestions. I think this is Thrift again. Inviting you back up. Welcome back.
Hello.
Hello.
The problem with drones is you kind of have to always specify input and output titles, which is more or less unavoidable with like design box type design. But something that you theoretically could do is basically have a drone, just a screen where you can say, okay, this drone should take gold from any gold storages and put them into any lab. Or
right.
just like
Yeah, so like again, going back to the filtering thing where you would basically give it like a resource filter, or you don't even need any resource filter. You could just have it be like, well, I guess you would kind of want a resource filter, but it would be something where it's like you filter its output to a certain type, so say labs, and then you filter its input type to a certain resource, so gold.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And then I see what you're saying.
And I think it's better to also have like the regular cargo drones as well, because sometimes you don't want to deposit from everywhere or take from everywhere and deposit to everywhere. So I think it'd be better if that was actually like a separate drone type or something.
Right, yeah. Or, and this is kind of just maybe a separate suggestion kind of working in between there, but cargo drones and transport drones, or just any drone that you can set up, could technically do that by default, and then you could override their zone by then setting the route. Just as like another example of like, maybe that's just something drones should always do, is they should just always have like they should try to, well, I don't know, because it's tough to say, because there's so many different scenarios where you would need drones doing different things.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think the best part is kind of have it like in Slime Rancher, if you played that game.
I have not.
Basically, you say, okay, you have a screen, like a UI screen, where you have your input, and then you can select it and then say, okay, you can choose any resource, or you can choose like just choose any resource, and then then you have your output, and you choose like any possible destination building that are like sorted in some way.
Right. Okay.
And that's why I think it would also be better to have it like as a separate building, because like that's a pretty major feature, or like a pretty major, or like a very strong difference between regular cargo drones and that type of filtering.
Yeah, it'd be quite a substantial difference with how you set them up.
Yeah.
I think so kind of what I'm gathering here from, and this is why I love doing this podcast, is because you'll set the topic to one thing, but then it turns into something else, and it's clear that something else is something that needs to happen before we talk about this topic. So what I was hoping we would talk about is like, more like the resource sinks and how we create more opportunities for resources to be used. But it's clear that before that this can happen is everybody's spamming walls, and it is taking me off track, you guys. Oh my god. walls. Yes. And now I've completely lost my track of. Oh god. What was I saying? Yeah, what we're saying is, I think before we look at resource sinks, we need to look at how the drones are set up and stuff, because that is very. It's obvious from what you guys are saying that is a very critical part of this game. And before we can look at creating more buildings that require resources, we need a way to supply them with resources in a way that is not so annoying or complicated to set up. But so far, yeah.
One other thing is, why not just have a mechanic that's similar to the labs in Classic, where certain types of buildings, like probably like for example, I don't know, repeaters or something, or like any turrets, turrets or like later tier turrets requiring ammo to shoot, but that ammo just being your resources, and it just takes them directly from the resources, like if you were to build anything. So like just have some resource drains where you don't need drones to support them.
Right, and this is something I've been thinking about heavily the last few days, and I've been bouncing back and forth between it a lot, because I do think turrets should consume resources, but I don't know if it should be every turret. And again, like you talk about, say like a repeater consumes gold when it fires. It consumes 1 gold every time it fires, and you don't need to supply that gold. Is that kind of creating a what's the word for it? Inconsistency in the game, where some things require drone inputs and other things don't?
I think as long as that kind of like you don't need to supplies, you don't need drones for it, as long as that's like very clearly disconnected, as in like only turrets or only things that you spam quite a lot of everywhere, which would obviously be horrible to set up with drones.
Yeah.
As long as it's like this very clear disconnect, I don't think there is a problem. But
yeah, and I think if there was going to be, like, if you needed to feed ammo to turrets, I think there would need to be some sort of intermediary logistics building, like an ammo feeder or something that would connect to a huge range of turrets around it, and then you would feed that the ammo.
That could also work. Yeah.
And also, I just like, yes, defenses can consume resources to fire, but it also just feels like you're burning resources for no real purpose, if that makes sense. Like it's just kind of creating an artificial resource sink, I think. And I would rather find ways where you're trying to get resources to get some sort of strategic advantage, and some of those resources already exist. Like in the power rework, Lumina Crystal. So the resources that you need to build Lumina Crystal, those will be a strategic resource because they directly impact your overall base's defensive capabilities. So I would love each resource to kind of filter into something that creates some sort of strategic like gameplay that you need to think about, and you need to choose, like, okay, I'm going to expand to this resource next because it's going to give me XYZ bonuses or whatever. And that just doesn't exist right now. And so I think that is something that we need to look at more, and it's something where I've looked at least with Essence. I think Essence should build into the stat upgrade system, where it's like you put a certain amount of Essence towards certain upgrades, and then that affects all the upgrades globally. So it's a global system, and then that makes the capturing Essence nodes more of a strategic choice that you have to do. And then with the generators, with the mini reactors also requiring Essence, that creates this kind of balancing game where it's like, okay, how much Essence am I going to use for power? How much Essence am I going to use for upgrades? And so yeah, just trying to create more of those strategic opportunities. Again, this is just still kind of on paper right now, this idea, but it's something that I think will become more clear once it's on experimental and you guys actually get your hands on it. But I do see somebody else's hand is up here, so thank you again, Thrift, for coming up. I'm going to invite, I think this is Awesome Games again. Hello.
I have a few more ideas to share.
Sure.
An idea about drones and an idea about the different types of buffs. First, the idea about drones. It could be a mix between like Thurl's idea about Slime Ranch style drones and my idea of supply drones. It could be global zones, where you just select an area, or groups, where you just select an area and signify as that as a group. Like, you might do this around, like, a certain gold mine. Say, that is, like, gold mine 1. And then you could have drones, instead of having to select over gold mine 1, you could just say, pull from gold mine 1, output to outpost 7.
Yeah, and I think that would create, that would let, so that, okay, so again, it's funny when you start talking about this stuff, because this is already a planned feature, but it's not planned for quite some time. It's planned to like update 3 or something. And so again, maybe this is something that needs to be pushed up in the priority list. Like, I'm also, for anybody here who's listening after the fact or here who doesn't know, I've pushed multiplayer's priority up tenfold. So multiplayer is actually the immediate next priority for me. So multiplayer will actually be the first thing that I work on once the power rework is done. And maybe the next thing that has to come after that is the logistics rework, logistics V2. Maybe these two things, like, it seems like these two things are extremely important, and a lot of people are talking about them over something like RTS, for example. So controlling gunships and sending them to locations and stuff. I think that is a very important aspect of the game, but it sounds like these systems that we're talking about here that you guys are suggesting are much higher on the priority list. And yeah, I think global zones is like, it's just, it sounds like it needs to be in the game for this game to actually like have more advanced logistics and stuff. Like, that is such a integral part of it. Yeah. But you had another idea, I think.
Yeah. Also, I think the reason no one's really going for RTS is because it isn't in the game. People are more focused on fixing what is there before adding in new things.
Right.
Yeah. And my other idea was a sort of mix between the local boosters and the global buffs. Like, it would be like the small local ones that are very small and like you'd put them in your wall pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Those would only consume power, never resources, because power is just basically resource that transports itself.
Right.
And so those would consume power, but there'd be bigger ones that would be like larger than a Redeemer when it comes to radius, that you'd like have one of for an outpost, or maybe a few spread across your main base. And those would take resources. That would allow for sort of a mix between the global and local systems. And you could have like, the small ones would be, you'd put them all over the place, but then they'd be less significant. Then there'd be the significant big ranges that are what need the resources and are complicated to work with, but provide big buffs, so you work with them anyway.
Yeah, and I think that I think that actually is a really good idea that works really well with the burner generator idea, where you have where you can burn any resource and turn it into power, and the value of that resource determines the amount of power that you get from it, because then that creates a balancing game between using like your local boost or whatever and using the global boost and stuff. So
that would work, as you could have a burner area boost.
Yeah,
which
exactly.
would boost like an entire outpost. Like, you could Also, another idea that would fit into burners, you could have them have a resource preference. Have like most generators have a resource preference, and they burn that resource more efficiently. But they can take other resources, which would add to a layer of intrigue. Like, you want to get the bitter ones because they will consume later game resources bitter. But you might, until you get those, put like that later game resource into an earlier game generator, even though it's less efficient.
Yeah. Yeah, I think those are some very good ideas.
Like that would encourage using mixed generators. Like, you could put the later game resource in the early game generator or the early game resource in the late game generator, but you're going to put them in their own generators because that's more efficient.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, there's just something going on in chat here. I'm not sure what just happened. Taylor, can you send me a DM? And we'll figure that out. But yeah, is there... Yeah, I like the idea of having like mixed generators that kind of makes you have to choose between, you know, like a strategic decision on like which resources you want to burn, and then, yeah, having that be also mixed in with having boosts that are only power related and stuff, I think is a really, really good idea. Yeah.
A lot of what I'm suggesting is making things be more like you have a broad range of options and you use different ones in different situations. Like, that's what most of my ideas have ended up being. It's like, so like, you could use this, but this is better in this situation. I've had a similar thing when I suggested generators.
Yeah.
With like the spatial generators and such.
Right, yeah. And right, because remember you suggested some different types of like generators last week as well. And yeah, just I think the whole idea is to create more opportunities and more choices for you to make as the player that then tie into like the resources and stuff that you're capturing. And I think that is a really smart idea. I do see somebody else is requesting now. Thank you again, Awesome Games, for coming up here. I don't know who this is. Again, I have streamer on. Oh, it's Snooze. Hello, Snooze.
Hello.
How's it going?
Pretty good. I think you should fix the walls.
Okay. Yes, I see. Everybody's spamming walls. Yeah, walls will be getting a rework. Yeah. It seems like this is a common theme. Then fix the walls. Yep. All right. Okay. Well, yeah, that's noted. Okay, does anybody else here have anything else that they'd like to add to the resource sync discussion? I see IHNN is discussing. I will invite you back on stage. Hello.
Can you hear me?
I sure can.
Okay. So this isn't about resources. I don't know if you saw my previous message in chat, but you can't set frame rate to unlimited, which it's a nitpick, but I want as little input lag as humanly possible because it just feels bad, and windowed mode doesn't work.
Yeah.
And with the reactor, after you unlock it, like when I research something, I just immediately click confirm research, and in the reactor it doesn't say that it needs to be placed on essence.
Right. You're talking about the mini reactor here? Sorry.
I think so.
Yeah, so yeah, right now in the current game it doesn't say anything, but in the power rework, so in V014, it will say that it needs to be placed on a certain resource, and it will actually restrict placement. So you can't actually place it unless it's on that resource tile. That's just for the mini reactors right now and the way that they're currently set up, but with other generators and stuff, they'll have like a much more clear description. And then what was the other thing that you were suggesting as well? You said you had sent a previous chat. I didn't see it though.
Yeah, so screen mode, it can be set to windowed, but it doesn't do anything.
Oh, yeah,
and
that's
also
a separate issue, yeah.
Yeah, it just immediately changes back to full screen after I go out of the settings menu.
Yep.
And the frame rate can only go up to 999 FPS, which is good enough, but I want as little input lag as possible. So if I, by some chance, manage to get over 1000 FPS, which I want on this PC, but if I get a new one, I might, then there's like input lag being left on the table.
Yeah, I don't... Like, how noticeable would that be, though? Like, 999 FPS is, like, having like I can uncap it. Is that what you're asking? Like, if do you want uncapped frame rates?
Yeah, uncapped. It just feels better to.
Okay, yeah, because uncapped is totally doable. Yeah, I just have the maximum set to 999 right now, just for purposes that made getting those settings set up easier. But I can definitely add an uncapped option to that.
Okay.
Yeah, I see some more people. Sorry, you go ahead.
There was nothing more.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for popping up here and giving your feedback. Jebediah says input lag isn't based on FPS, it's based on your mouse. Yeah, I mean, like, uncapped FPS is one thing, but I don't see how that ties into input lag, really. Especially, like, if you're hitting 999 FPS, like, there shouldn't be any input lag. Enemy damage. Yeah, it's funny, I did this podcast topic with the hopes of talking more about resource sinks, but it's great to hear from you guys, and it's great to hear what you guys think is a bigger priority, because that shows me that before we really start thinking about resource sinks, there are other things that we need to think about, mainly that being drones and having better ways to set up drones. And yes, I see everybody spamming walls again. Fixing walls is also very much something that needs to happen, and I think maybe the walls can be tied into the resource sinks. So yeah, I see there was a couple more people hopping at the end here. Did anybody else have anything they'd like to add on the topic of resource sinks and stuff that hasn't already been said? I think we definitely need to start with looking at a better ways to set up drones. I think this is Vetrez requesting to speak, so I'm bringing you up on stage. Hello.
Hi.
What was your ideas?
So I sent my suggestion already in here. But if you want, I can read something, or I don't know.
You mean like another suggestion?
Yeah.
Sure.
For generators. So maybe like a generator of next tier that will take a high amount of resources to be built, and would work for a very long time. And after some time, you could start it up again with some resources. And maybe it could like degrade over time, so it's work less, but not like unusable.
So you're saying, a generator that like kind of burns itself out unless you repair it with resources, is what you're saying?
Yeah, kinda.
Yeah, that I could see that being a possibility. When you say burn, or are you saying like efficiency is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, so the efficiency is dependent on the resources it's fed.
Yeah, because it would work for a very long time, and I think that's big thing. You don't need to do anything about it.
Right. Okay, I see what you're saying.
It will just degenerate.
Yeah.
Balance.
I think any sort of generator that we add needs to have some sort of resource burn to it. And I really think the resources that it burns should maybe, like, obviously with the burner solution or the burner idea, any resource can go in there, so that works fine. But generators that maybe take a specific type of resource, they should take different types of resources, and not necessarily just like Lumina Crystal, for example, like the generators are set up to do. Because then obviously that doesn't really solve the resource problem. All right, we are at the 1 hour mark here, so this is kind of the last call. I do see some more new people hopped in here. Mr. Huh and the Blue Biscuit both hopped in here at the end. I don't know if there's anything that you guys would like to add to the resource sinks idea. We talked quite a bit today about what needs to come before the resource sinks, which it sounds like the community would really like some better ways to set up drones, and kind of make that process a lot simpler. And also, as chat keeps spamming and keeps taking my attention away, is fixing walls. Yeah, so I think if nobody else has anything to say there, we'll wrap up this episode. This one we touched on a lot of other topics, but I think that was still super helpful to me because it kind of shows what needs to come before, better resource sinks. And so I think looking at the priority list of what needs to happen, as you guys know, multiplayer has been pushed up in priority quite a bit. And I think after that's done, the next immediate thing that needs to be looked at is better logistics, more ways to set up your drones and not have it be such an annoying tasks to do. Having like global zones and automatic routes and creating more ways for you to move resources around your base. And then we can look at, what are different buildings that can consume resources, because then that can play nicely into those better logistics. So I think there's kind of an order of events that these need to happen in. And yeah. So I think we'll wrap this episode up here. Thank you for everybody who tuned in and gave their opinions. Taylor, I will read your DMs. I don't know what happened there. But yeah, thank you everybody for tuning in, and I will see you all next week.